Hi, my name is Reggie Williams, and I'm one of the executive directors of Black Film Space. Black Film Space is a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting the careers of Black filmmakers. We host workshops, panels, and other community building events that are designed to support Black content creators. We also have a membership program that offers discounts to filmmaking resources, free events, a filmmaking database, grants, a mentorship program, and much more. In the next episode of the Black Film Space podcast, we talk with Ruel Smith, an animator and VFX artist. Ruel has worked on Black Panther, The Jungle Book, and Flags of Our Father. We talk with Ruel about breaking into animation, the difference between CG animation and VFX, and much more. This episode was executive produced by Reggie Williams and Sino Gibson, and edited by Leah Kirksey. And now, on to our interview. All right, Ruel, welcome to the Black Film Space podcast. How are you today?
I'm good, man. Thanks you for having me, Reggie.
Thank you for being here. Really excited to get in and dive into this conversation. I'd like to just start off by getting to know more about how you started off as an animator. Like what was the beginning part of your journey like?
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so I was born and raised in Jamaica, and a kid brat going about his life, and then I saw Lion King, and just like I was the kid that saw Lion King and just kind of fell in love with how that film made me feel, and then literally the next day, I started drawing Lion King. And I just told myself, that's what I want to do. I don't know what that is, but that's what I want to do for a living. And then fast forward a couple years, my mom was living in the U.S., specifically New Jersey. And so I migrated to the U.S. for high school. And it just so happens a teacher at the school had just started a animation program, almost like a DIY animation program. He was just a fan of Disney and art, and so he started an animation program, and I just that's where I developed the love and the blueprint for wanting to be an animator.
Dope. It's interesting because when I saw The Lion King, that might have been one of the first movies that I can remember watching in the theaters, and I just remember feeling really moved by the film and feeling like I wanted to be like a lion or whatever I was feeling.
Yeah.
And it took me years to realize how sensitive I am to like art. Like when I consume art, like if I consume rap music, I want to be a rapper. When I watch The Lion King, I want to be and that was like one of the first things that made me kind of want to feel like, being a character in that film. But what is it about that film do you feel like it inspired you?
I just think the storytelling and how it made me feel. I think I can tell you the specific scene. It's the scene after Mufasa falls off the cliff, and then young Simba runs up to him and is tugging on his ear. And just of how they made me feel, I was like, wow, like, I don't know how they did that, but I want to be a part of that. And then the other side of that coin of animation was the other film, the number 2 film in my, top 10 films of all times that made me who I am, was Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
When I saw Jurassic Park as well, I was like, oh, how are they doing these dinosaurs? How they're doing that? I want to be a part of that. Right.
Yeah.
And so it just sparked, the curiosity and just how are they creating that and how can I be a part of that?
Got you. And how did you get to like your first like credits as an animator?
Gotcha. My first credit, let's see. So and just to kind of plug for this, since the Black Film Space, the high school that I went to, because it's very timely right now, is the Cicely Tyson Performing and Fine Arts High School in East Orange, named after obviously the late great Cicely Tyson, who was a very pivotal, in our just kind of artistic freedom and education. So I went to School of Visual Arts in New York City, graduated with a degree in computer animation. And so my first credit was with a studio called Treehouse. It's no longer around, but they did the very first Star Wars Legos spot. This is back in 2004. They did the very first like Star Wars Lego short film, animated short film. And I came on, after I graduated, I worked on my demo reel as an animator, submitted it to multiple studios in New York City. And I got an internship. And the internship at that studio was working on that animation for the Star Wars Legos. And then it transitioned into my first paying gig, which is where I got my first credit there. The first bigger credit in animation or visual effects was after I moved to LA. There's an animation program here called SIGGRAPH that happened every year in LA at the convention center. And I went there, signed up, got an opportunity at a company called Digital Domain. They're known for Titanic. And my first credit was a Flags of Our Fathers, which was a Clint Eastwood war film. So those would be my two first big credits in the industry.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And what kind of stories do you like to tell?
That's interesting. So I've transitioned into directing, right? And it's this weird space where my career is within animation, both, character, animated cartoons, but also visual effects animation. And that's what I do within animation. But as a director, I like Tarantino, Fincher, Nolan, Alfonso Cuarón. I love Barry Jenkins, right? So the type of films that are stories that I like are high concept, multiple storylines that intermingle with each other, which necessarily you don't really see much of that within animation. So I'm sitting on the fence of this where I love animation, but as a director and as a storyteller, I like more of the live action films, like Seven, Memento. Yeah.
Do you think it's possible for animation to go in that direction? Is that something you want to see?
Absolutely. I mean, you're seeing it a lot in anime, right? Like you're seeing it a little bit. I just talked to someone about Cowboy Bebop, right? And those type of Samurai Champloo and Dragon Ball Z, right? Where you have these multiple storylines, they time jump, right? And they intersect. And so I think obviously anime, it plays a big space more in the anime world, but yeah, I definitely seeing it, being more adult and as far as animation can really cross over, I think.
Got you. And when you first started off, how did you think being an animator would look like or feel like, and how? I mean, was it different than reality? And
Yeah, I would say yes and no, right? When I started out, I just wanted to do that for a living, right? Like it was pure passion and obsession and wanting to just hone the craft. I just wanted to be a part of it, right? So even in high school, I would be running back to the animation labs, during lunch, before school started, after school finished. And it was just wanting to be a part of that group of artists and creatives, and how, these animators are getting to, create these movies that I grew up on, right? It was never a more logistical, concrete way of just if I could do that for a living in any capacity, I'm signing up. Over my time of falling in love with animation, and when I started getting into more to animating as a career, it went from a more, you saw a much more 2D, landscape of people making, animators or artists, to being more 3D animation, to where you started seeing Toy Story and more Pixar driven films. And once I got in and my career started flourishing, you're seeing more motion capture and more Marvel films, right? More animation within visual effects. And so it changed in that aspect where you had more 2D animators in the 90s, and then you're seeing more 3D animations in 2000. And so it, for me, what I wanted to learn in high school, I wanted to be a 2D animator, and then in college, I kind of transitioned more into 3D animation. And so I would say it changed more that way. I think being a part of a group of just artists and creatives, that stayed the same, and working on like big films and big productions, that kind of feeling was what I imagined, in imagining it and being a part of it.
Got you. What is with everything in life, there's a cost. If you go down one path, there's a cost. If you go down a different path, there's a different cost. So in regards to being an animator, like, what is the cost in regards to maybe like your lifestyle, or in regards to I don't know, maybe some of the challenges that comes with being an animator, like literally like when you're sitting there making the visual effects or the drawings or the animations, like what are some of the challenges that come along with being an animator that maybe you didn't foresee when you first started, or something, if somebody's listening to this and they're interested in being an animator, they might want to know, like, what are some of the challenges or what are some of the costs involved?
Gotcha. Yeah. So there's multiple ways we can look at that. And this kind of speaks to the previous question a little bit. When I was graduating college, the mecca, for the most part, was LA, right? For animation and visual effects. All the studios, most of the studios were here. 90% of them were in LA, at least solely out of LA. You had a little bit in London, and you have Weta in New Zealand, the people that did Lord of the Rings. And then you had ILM in North California and near San Francisco, and then Pixar, obviously, up in San Francisco. But a lot of it was centralized in LA. So coming to LA was kind of a lot of the end all be all for 3D animation, at least, and visual effects. And then over, a span of 10 years, you saw Vancouver, it being like moved and outsourced to like a Vancouver, Montreal, India, Australia. And so it was a lot more US based as far as visual effects where the work was being done. And now a lot of it is outside of the US as far as feature film animation. So for a young artist coming up in the States, it traditionally used to be Europe, international artists would have to move to the States. And now you're seeing, if you want a bit more longevity as far as feature and final animation, you have to be prepared to like live in a Montreal, live out of country, live in Vancouver, or migrate to those places, migrate to Europe, New Zealand. So as far as that, I would say, think of it that way. I think what has changed as well, how you learn animation. Before, you had to go to a particular college. Like I went to School of Visual Arts. There's Academy of Art in LA. I mean, there's Academy of Art in San Francisco. There's Cal Arts in LA. Whereas you can get animation training from anywhere in the world, right? Through like an animation mentor and I Animate, like a more online animation training where you're learning from the best in the industry. So there is that kind of twofold. It is a very micro technical field of like animating frame by frame or going at something frame by frame. And so it's very tedious. It's a long process. You could be on a project, on a movie, and you may at best have 2 minutes to 5 minutes worth of footage, right? At the end of it that you've worked on or you were a part of. And 2 to 5 minutes is being very generous, because you can easily work on a 10 to 15 second shot for like a month.
Yeah.
Right. So you're thinking of like a place like Pixar, that's like, maybe 200 artists over 3 years span working on a film. Right. So yeah, I would say those are the things, are the cost effects. of being an animator. I think the main thing you focus on is as an animator, an artist coming in, is building your community of, you know, like-minded people to keep you accountable, of people wanting to be in animation. You have Facebook groups about animation. You have different, you know, like 11-second club or CG Society that you can join and find like-minded, you know, animators. But really just developing your love for it, because the payoff in a tangible way is never amount to the amount of hours you have to put in.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went to a performing and fine arts high school, studied, you know, art for 8 years between high school and animation and college, just to get the privilege of being a starving artist, right?
Yep.
Just to move out and get an entry-level job in animation. And so the most important thing is to develop your love for art and for animation.
Got you. It's got to be genuine. I mean, it's like most other positions.
Because you're going to put in a lot of hours. You're going to put in a lot of hours.
Yeah. So why do you think the industry or the studios have moved outside of America to Vancouver, Montreal, and Europe? Like, what is the
tax incentives? Yeah, tax incentives, tax subsidies. A lot of those places, like, you know, because California is a little bit more unionized, and, you know, a lot of those places have slightly less, you know, unionizing. And then those cities are paying, or in tax incentives, are paying the productions, you know, money to bring the work there and develop it there. So you see that kind of like with filmmaking, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they start shooting in different, like, you know, Louisiana or Atlanta, because they're giving up tax incentives, or out of country. It's kind of the same thing. You know, a lot of VFX and animation studios have created headquarters in, you know, Vancouver, Montreal. The headquarters are still here as well, but they have other, like, locations in Montreal and Vancouver, London, wherever the tax incentives are, they just require that they bring a large portion of the work being done there.
Got you.
In those places.
So if an animator is going to these cities, is it on a short-term basis? Is it like, all right, I'm gonna be here for like 6 months or a year, or is it like, I'm gonna go to Vancouver and be here for like 10 years? Like, if you're coming out of college, or you're, you know, entry level, is it like, all right, let me find a city that I like and I can get a job? Or is it like, let me start off in LA and see where that takes me?
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's because it's going to be based on your visa, right? And so I think you apply for the position, and if you get in and they're willing to pay for sponsor your visa, they'll most likely do it on like maybe a year basis or the project basis. So if it's a film that's going to run 8 months or 6 months, because they're paying for your visa, or they would have to pay for your visa if they do decide to sponsor you, they would want to keep you around, right? Because that process can be tedious.
Mm-hmm.
So you can expect, I wouldn't say you go there expecting automatically to be there for 10 years, but you can expect to be there for 6 to 9 to 12 months. And then you either try to roll it over, or, you know, a lot of those places, those locations have multiple different studios. So you can, you know, once you're in the community and you've worked at a studio on a particular project, you can easily start applying to maybe the other places in case the work, you know, dries up a little bit or slows down at that spot. So you can expect, I've had friends that bounce around. They might spend a couple years in Vancouver, a couple years in London, whether it's 6 months to 2 years. A production can house you there for like 6 months if that's where they're shooting. Or had a couple friends that worked on Lion King, the recent Lion King, and they started out here in previs, and then they did final animation in London at a different studio. And so they just flew them there for the 6 to 8 months.
That does sound like it would bring up a fair amount of challenges around, you know, family and relationships and friends. And
yeah, I would say most artists, because when they're starting out young, they would be more interested in that, right? Like artists that want to travel or live in different places. It's a good way to do that. when you get older and you want to settle down, I think that's where the challenge lies, that you either buckle down here in that particular location, or you take a job that's giving you longevity elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got you. And so you've been a part of a lot of major productions, one being Black Panther. Can you kind of walk us through your experience on that film?
Yeah.
From like starting from when you got the job to like implementing the actual vision.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I got the job through Digital Domain, the same company that I started at, in the beginning when I first moved to LA. And through them, that's the studio that I worked on Jungle Book, Black Panther, and Captain Marvel. Mm-hmm. So I was hired through them for post-viz animation. And, so I was brought on through there, and because it was post-viz, pre-viz animation and post-viz animation, because you're using visual effects and animation to help figure out and shape the story, you have to be within relative close proximity to the director and editing team, right? Mm-hmm. Because you're helping still figure out what the story is going to be or what it's going to look like. And so they send a few of us post-viz animators to the Disney lot to work within that production, in the same, space as the editors and the directors. And so, yeah, I was brought on just as a post-viz animator to the rest of the team of post-viz animators. And it was kind of somewhat the same crew that started with pre-viz and post-viz animation. And to explain that a little bit, pre-viz animation is animation that's conceptualized to figure out the story before the movie is shot, filmed. Mm-hmm. So they have a script, and then they kind of use pre-viz animation to kind of think of it as like a demo track for a musician or a singer. The producer and a writer creates a demo track, and then they send it over to like the final art, singer, or the famous singer, and then they do their final rendition of the demo track. Gotcha. Pre-viz and post-viz animation is a similar situation where the pre-viz team took the script or sequences of the script and figured out how they were going to do these chase scenes or these scenes that are harder to just go in and shoot impromptu. And then once they go shoot them, the post-viz animation kind of does like a 80% version of, or 75% version of what the scenes are going to look like, comped into like some of the shots that were shot. And then you put that into the edit, and then then the director feels like, okay, we like this take, we like this version, we like where the sequence is going, then we'll send that off to final. So I came in as a post-viz animator right when they were just finishing filming principal photography, and right after they had finished filming. So in between, they were either filming the tail end of principal, and they came back from Atlanta back to LA to kind of work on post-viz. And so I was brought in a part of the animation team to help figure out some post-viz animation on a couple of sequences with the team, most notably the fight scene in the casino, the scene right after the casino, and the car chase scene where he backflips and lands on the car right after he gets out of the casino. And then some of the battlefield scene at the end, and then in the vibranium. Mm-hmm. And it's really just, along with the rest of the post-viz animation team, you're at, service to the director and the editing team to provide different variations based on the pre-viz and the story and the plates that they shot. You're taking all of that and then finding different ways to bring it together to present to the director. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing was, for me, what was special about being on Black Panther was I knew Ryan Coogler from prior, mm-hmm. From when he was, at USC. We'd crossed paths then. And then the visual effects supervisor, we worked together early on in my career at Digital Domain. And so we all converged on this project separately. And it was just kind of like this kind of reunion of the three of us. Having known each other, prior to.
Dope.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Um, so I imagine there's some sort of like head animator that communicates with the director, like that helps bring this to life and visualize and prep.
Yep.
Yeah. How does one like move up to that level?
So yeah, the two positions as what would be considered head animator would be the animation supervisor, and then right above that, the animation director, right? And so your natural lineage as an animator is you start out as, a junior animator, then you become an animator, senior animator, um, animation lead, right? And then animation supervisor, and then animation director. And it's based on, just your experience within the industry, how you've performed on each project, and if you're at a place for a roughly a long amount of time, a decent amount of time, you get promoted. Or you've gotten enough experience as an animator on features, or commercials at a place, and you see an opening, you apply based on your resume and your experience. You apply for, I want to be an animation supervisor, or I want to be an animation director.
Gotcha. And so I know that you're a director, like you direct live action films.
Yep.
And you're also an animator. So what path do you want to go down?
So I spent the last 15, 16 years as an animator, and right after Black Panther, I decided I was ready to tell my own stories. I dabbled a little bit with it and with directing, but right after Black Panther, I had committed to transitioning into directing. And so I started embarking on that journey, obviously, to pay the bills. I still stayed an animator. But I decided at the beginning of 2020, that's when I was going to transition into directing. And so I made that leap, during, I would say midway during 2020, into commercial directing to start with my, my eye on, settling into feature film directing. That's kind of where I'm ready to be. I've, spent, 16 years as an animator, within the visual effect, within the animation and visual effects industry. And I'm ready to make my mark as, telling my own stories as a director, which can be, directing animation or directing live action. Obviously, I think majority I want to spend doing live action. But I have, both experiences.
Gotcha. How do you think being an animator for, 15, 16 years informs your directing, whether it's directing animation or directing live action? Like,
yeah, you be a part of, you're within the cog and the hub of creating story, right? As an animator, you have to learn about storytelling. What is the shot? What is the directive of the shot? What is the directive of the shot within the sequence, within the scene? How does it play within the story? And so you learn storytelling, which is embedded in learning, being an animator. And then just the experiences that I've been fortunate to have on various types of productions, whether it's, commercials, video games, feature films, episodic. I think being able to problem solve and then, convey a particular, story or point and figure out the technical aspect of it, but stay on brand with the story and deliver that to, the direction of what the director wants, what the VFX supervisor is thinking, what your animation supervisor. You're kind of within this collaborative space that you have to work within. And I think that lends to, once you're, at the bottom of the ticket or in the middle of the ticket, once you become, you rise to the top of the ticket, those experiences of, going through the journey of being an artist in visual effects really helps me kind of technically break down certain, areas. I use a particular, analogy of in Dark Knight Rises when Batman, goes up against Bane. and he tries to drop the smoke bomb or whatever. And, he says, you merely adopted darkness. I was born in it, right? Being in visual effects, to be able to direct a film that has visual effects or has animation, I've been in the trenches. I'm the one that's, quote unquote, fixing it in post, or one of the people that's fixing it in posts when something doesn't work well on set, right? And so having that experiences in the trenches of animation and visual effects helps me when I'm at, the top of the ticket. I understand what it's like and what we need to do prior to filming, or from a storytelling standpoint, bringing in, the visual effects or the animation perspective before we even get to that point.
Got you. What is something that maybe you wish more directors understood in regards to visual effects and animation?
The mentality of not necessarily just fixing it in post, right? But like including animation and visual effects, the VFX supervisors, the VFX approach early on into storytelling conversations, into pre-production conversations, as a way to help achieve the story point that they want in a timely or in a creative manner, right? And from a budgetary standpoint, because sometimes a lot of visual effects, why it's more expensive is because it was maybe not shot well or done well, and we have to kind of figure out a way in post-production, what they call fix it in post. And I think including animation and visual effects early on in that conversation, before filming, into the story aspect. And that's done, I would say, obviously that's done from a Disney standpoint, a DreamWorks, a Pixar standpoint. That happens more so because it's all animation, right? So that's implemented early on. But in the visual effects world, that's not necessarily the case. And so that's what I would say. That's kind of what I bring to the table. I think a lot of the movies that you can think of, blockbusters, a lot of my friends have worked on them. So I can have that conversation with them early on and understand the language of what we need to do before we go film. Yeah.
What does early on mean to you? Like when?
From once you've written a story, or even in story, if you're still crafting the story, if you're still polishing the story, in development, in pre-production, bringing in the visual effects perspective before you go film. And to say, hey, this little bit of prepping would help you so much longer in the long run, because you got to think, the director, the DP, the actors, the filming, they're going to be on set 30 days, right? Visual effects, we're going to be in visual effects for 4 months, 6 months, sometimes longer. And so by hours, we're on the film a little bit longer than production. And so there's certain things that could, save time and money in the long run if we did a little bit of pre-planning or, VFX, prepping before we shoot, on set as we shoot. If we film certain things or got certain elements on set that would help VFX, it could cut the time down and the stress level in visual effects.
Got you. Yeah, it makes sense. That's a response I'm hearing a lot lately, is to bring in the other crew early in prep, so that definitely makes sense.
And what I'm trying to usher, just to kind of start, to jump in, what I'm trying to usher in is, a lot of films, a lot of visual effects leaning or driven films are directed by non-visual effects directors. And so I, along with a few others, you think Wes Ball, who did Maze Runner, Neil Blomkamp, who did District 9, they're also both visual effects artists turned directors. So I'm definitely pushing that movement of, hey, I can direct live action that come from a VFX background. So, pushing myself as that, having the experience on both sides of the fence definitely helps the production a lot better.
Yeah, I can imagine. What are some of the creative differences, if any, between CG animation and VFX?
Gotcha. So I think just VFX and CG in general are just the umbrella wording, right? VFX is anything that's not done like special effects, like practically on set, right? Um, CG animation tends to lend to more of the like the cartoony, the Pixar, DreamWorks, you know, Disney side of things a little bit, and then VFX is like the Marvel, right? Like that more the Marvel, Warner Brothers, the superhero style movies, or the you know you think of I Am Legend, right? Lord of the Rings, that type of animation. But they're interchangeable and they're one and the same. Um, Visual effects, yeah, as I said, is just encompassing all effects done digitally on a computer. Um, Whereas CG animation is a sub compartment of VFX.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So the creative process is pretty similar.
It's pretty similar. It's just more stylized.
Mm-hmm. So if a director is let's say it's a director who doesn't have much experience with VFX and is working on a project, and they want some visual effects. What because as a director you should be able to communicate with people on your team, even if you're not an expert. They're the experts. Yeah. You're communicating with them. So what are some things that the director can learn or can say to communicate with animators more effectively?
Yeah, I think it starts with bringing in a visual effects supervisor, which is the standard way of going about it right now. Bringing in someone that may be a compositing supervisor, bringing in someone that's a CG supervisor, a CG generalist, but you normally bring on a visual effects supervisor, someone who's worked within visual effects for a long time. They've seen everything, right? And then communicate from a creative story point, and then the visual effects supervisor can give you options of breaking it down from a visual effects technique standpoint, based on your timeline, your budget, because most things are possible. It's really about the schedule you have and the budget you have, right? And so that VFX supervisor can present visual effects treatments based on sequences you're trying to pull off. So yeah, like sourcing, getting a solid visual effects supervisor or someone within visual effects onto your team early that you can kind of communicate what you want.
Got you. And what is keyframe animation?
Keyframe animation, obviously, versus motion capture. Keyframe animation is where it's the animator is going in and posing the character in CG, frame by frame, keyframe by keyframe. Whereas the not necessarily opposite of that, but what's the other side of the coin is motion capture animation, where you take an actor or a stunt, person, and you put them in a motion capture suit with all these metal, small, metal, spherical objects around the suit. And you put them in this kind of motion capture volume and these sensors capture their body performance, and you capture that into the computer, and then you use that, and then you interpret that onto the character. So one is literally the animator is keyframing it hand by hand, by frame themselves, each pose. The other is capturing the performance of an actor on stage.
Okay. Gotcha. So you have a relatively new position as the head of visual effects and animation at Step Studios.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yes. Started. Well, the head of animation and visual effects position started this January. I've been working with them since last July, mainly starting as a freelance director and a visual effects supervisor. And then we kind of worked together a little bit. And then this year they brought me on as to kind of oversee the visual effects and animation across the studio for every project.
Got you. And what would you say it has taken you to get to this level in your career?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, simply break it down. It's like animation is somewhat of a technical, you know, art form, much like, you know, like playing an instrument or learning an instrument. So once you've learned the technical aspect of it and you've proven yourself there, it's, you know, it's really just getting a bunch of experiences and projects under your belt. And then, you know, working your way up, proving yourself, you know, being able to work in great environments. You know, I've put in a lot of, you know, obviously like most VFX artists, crazy hours. I've done like 14-hour days, you know, for 21 days straight on a project, you know, 12-hour days for 31 days straight. But I think it's just, you know, proving yourself, you know, building a great relationship and network and getting a bunch of projects and years under your belt. And then you just naturally move up to the ladder, you know, to, you know, once you progress and get better to a senior animator or an animation supervisor. What I did is not necessarily a traditional route going into head of animation and VFX. It's at that point, you can kind of choose where you want to go. Do you want to just stay as a senior animator and just animate or be freelance? Do you want to be an animation supervisor? Do you want to move into animation directing? I think once you get to a certain point in your career around being like just a senior animator, you can choose different paths. The path that I've chosen for this one, which I could have done a lot earlier, I just decided this was the point that I was ready to do it, was I wanted to move into directing. And so I wanted to get the industry to see me as a director more, or like, you know, oversee more animation and visual effects. And so this opportunity presented itself while I was looking to, you know, take on more directing responsibilities. Step Studios was looking for, you know, people with more CG visual effects experience. So we were able to kind of combine both of those, you know, and really help each other out. They bring me on to give me the directing experience in commercials, and I was able to lend, you know, the CG and VFX experience and knowledge because they were getting more visual effects and CG projects. So it worked out for both sides. I think it goes back to just, you know, honing your craft and, you know, developing and keeping the love for the craft of animation. And once you've done that, once you've proven that, you're going to get caught back, right? It's who you know, for the most part, that gets you in the door, building your network. It's what you know that keeps you in the door. And so that space in between, you know, you work on one project, you do well, they're going to call you back, right? And then they're going to move you up little by little. And so once you get to a position where you've proven yourself across multiple studios, a variety of projects, you can, for the most part, write your own ticket and journey of where you want to go.
Gotcha. Can anyone be good at the technical aspect of animation? Yeah.
Absolutely. You just have to, you know, love, you know, the craft, love the art, and willing to put the time in. It's needed, the hours in, it's needed to develop, you know, to hone your craft. But anyone can. Anyone can. And these days you can do it from anywhere, which was the harder part, you know, early on, when I first started out to now. You can be anywhere in the world and get the highest level of visual effects or animation training, as long as, obviously, if you have, you know, internet.
So with stand-up comedy, for example, you know, there's a general timeline. Like if you really practice your craft consistently, and like you're doing it to like deliberate practice, as they say, and you do that for 5 years, you can get good. You do that for 10 years, you can be great. If you get lucky, maybe you get on TV or become famous or whatever. But it's generally about 5 years to get good, 10 years to be great. It's typically what you hear with stand-up comedy. With animation,
Gotcha.
Is there some sort of timeline? I know, you know, there's no hard and fast rules, but is there some sort of timeline to get really good and move up to some of these positions?
Yeah, I would say that varies. It depends on how the artist takes to it or the circumstance that person is placed in. I came in through a department, a position called camera tracking, match moving. So it was like an entry level within VFX, and then I moved my way up in a couple of years to animation. I would say, I mean, just based on whether you go to school for it, you spend maybe 2 to 3 to 4 years in school, and then you come out. I would say within 2 to 3 years, you could go from being a junior animator starting out to being a really solid mid-level to senior. I would say 2 to 5 years. You can go from being a junior level to a mid to a senior level um,
Okay.
animator.
That seems like
Yeah.
pretty reasonable. I know there's a lot of hours involved, but that seems yeah.
Yeah, and that's after college, right? Like that's after, I went to a 4-year college to study computer animation. But also there's programs that put you through it within 18 months. Um, 12 to 18 months of just, hardcore boot camp training. You think of like iAnimate or Animation Mentor.
Gotcha. And what direction do you hope to steer Step Studios?
I mean, they're in a great direction now. Like they're a really cool, commercial production house. For me, it's just helping them level up in getting more visual effects and animation work that we pitch for, which you pitch to agencies, and just helping them get a much more streamlined process within visual effects and animation. So when those commercials or projects, animation driven or VFX driven projects come along, they're ready. They have the work on their reel of me being a part of the studio, and then they can go after those bigger animation or VFX driven jobs.
Okay. In regards to COVID, what kind of effect is it having on the industry as a whole? I would imagine it would be good.
Yeah, unfortunately, right? Unfortunately for the situation of COVID, one of the reasons I was brought on was because of shutdown of production. They were getting a lot more animation or CG driven commercial jobs, and so the work as a within animation and visual effects did not get rocked too much, or it kind of accelerated in certain cases because a lot of production companies could not film, so they relied on more animation projects. And so I feel like there ended up being more visual effects and CG driven jobs. And then, the setups that a lot of us have, you can kind of work from home for the most part. So the working from home thing was easy to adapt to.
Got you. And where do you feel like animation and VFX is like heading? Because it seems like back in the 90s there weren't nearly as many projects, but now not only is there more projects, it just seems like more films have visual effects and animation than I can ever remember.
Gotcha. Yeah, the biggest, just to kind of get a little nerdy, the biggest change or advancement in where VFX is getting is Unreal virtual production, which you saw how they did on Jungle Book, Lion King, and even how like Jon Favreau morphed the technology into Mandalorian, where you have these giant LED screens and volumes where you're putting the CG environment, you're projecting it on the screen on a large format screen, and then using that as the backdrop to reflect onto the actors. I see a lot more of those, high level productions being done in virtual production. You're thinking of Avatar, you're thinking of, the Lion Kings, you're thinking of, Mandalorian, a lot more of those type of productions, and that crossing over into television, that crossing over into commercials, and so forth.
Okay.
So anyone that's listening to this, the Unreal real-time engine, And virtual production, definitely start, learning that. To me, that's the future of all visual effects entertainment.
All right, I'm gonna ask you a tough question, and you have to be honest.
Okay.
Which animation do you prefer? The Lion King in 1994 or the more recent one?
Oh, that's easy. The original, always. I mean, that changed. What you just mean as far as technical
Like,
animation
I guess,
standpoint?
what is your preference? Yeah.
Oh, the first one. It's always gonna. It's my favorite film ever. And I mean, it was done really well. It was very photorealistic, but you know, I love the stylized version of The Lion King, and yeah, it's gonna be the first one, without question.
Did you hate the second with the more recent one? Because a lot of people hated it. A lot of people really didn't like it.
Yeah, it felt like a National Geographic. I wouldn't say I hated it. It's for a different generation now, right? But yeah, for me, my personal preference was more stylized, and I love. Yeah, to me, it's even like Lion King 1.5, or whatever it was called. Like, I still prefer the original to that one.
I haven't seen the more recent Lion King, but when I watched the trailer, I was like blown away. I was like, I actually really want to. I don't really watch animated films as much, and but
Yeah,
when I saw the trailer
gotcha.
for that, I was like, oh, I gotta see this. I still haven't seen it yet, but it made me want to like
Gotcha.
go see it in the theaters. You know, a Disney animated film.
Yeah, it feels more like a National Geography.
Yeah.
Like, it's so realistic with just like talking narration. But yeah,
So
that wasn't a tough question, man. You got to ask a tougher one than that.
I don't think I have any right now, but maybe you join us again.
I'll give you a little bit. I had the two films that I had the opportunity in some cases to work on: the latest Lion King, and Jurassic World, I guess. And I, for the most part, for the first one, I kind of passed on it, the latest Lion King, because it's my childhood. You know what I mean? Like, the first one and the first Jurassic Parks, they're just like childhood, emblems to me, and I don't want to taint that in any way. So I decided to just, like, step aside and not submit to work on it. And the reason why I could have worked on it, because Jon Favreau, who came from Jungle Book, went over to do Lion King. So it's a lot of the same team that went over.
Yeah, I would have thought you would have jumped at the Lion King opportunity.
Nope. I don't want to mess with Jurassic Park and Lion King as far as my childhood experience.
I get it. So how do you you've been doing this 16 years. How do you stay sharp? Is it just like you go to work, or are you studying? Are you practicing?
At this point, from an animation standpoint, I mean, I'm just constantly working, right? And the job itself, you're always pushing the boundary. So you're always learning something new. You're always practicing. I'm animating. Well, when I was an animator, still actively animating, I was animating, Monday to Friday, 8 to 10 hours a day, figuring out new solutions to pull off, a new project. So not necessarily going home. At home, I work on my, like, directing and my own personal stories and stuff like that. But you just constantly, once you start working, it's kind of like a hamster wheel, right? Like, you naturally, that's the best way to get better. It's to be on an actual production.
Gotcha. Do you have anything else that you want to say, maybe that I didn't ask, or any tips for people starting off?
Just, hone your craft, develop a love and a passion for the craft. That's the most important thing. You don't develop that, nothing else will come, or nothing else will be worth it, because the amount of hours you put in, it never matches the dollar amount. It's definitely a love and an obsession for it, right? No matter how much dollar amount you put on the table, the amount of hours that you put into honing your craft. And I came from an environment where there wasn't a lot of, people that looked like me, or I saw, or people in my family that was championing being an animator. I told my mom when I was 13, I was going to move to California and work on cartoons. And she thought it was just like the craziest thing. And so for me, I was just so obsessed with animation and my love of honing the craft and getting better. And you focus on that and just finding people, like-minded people around you. It doesn't matter where you come from, where you live. You can achieve your dreams. Are
you content with the amount of Black animators and visual effects artists in the industry right now?
Never content. It's gotten a lot better from when I started. Never content. There's always room to be more diverse and grow. It has gotten a lot better, but it has ways to go.
Are people working on that? Are there like organizations, or are initiatives or programs or anything?
Yeah, I would say so. There's a few just internal, just like lower end groups like Facebook groups. But also industries are looking to bring in, different companies are looking to bring in more diverse people into the community. But just the natural effect of it being, having social media and that entity available, you're seeing people see more people that look like them. You're seeing up and coming artists and animators seeing people that look like them, seeing representation that looks like them, and them themselves wanting to get into it. So it's definitely getting better and it's growing. And I look forward to see where it goes.
Well, thank you so much, Ruel, for dropping by the Black Film Space podcast, dropping some knowledge, some gems. Congratulations again on your new position. And where can people find you on the internet?
Thank you for having me. Thank you for being making me a part of this Black Film Space. I appreciate it. You can find me at my handle is Ruel, spelled REELRUEL. And that's my website, realruel.com, or on Instagram, realruel, and on LinkedIn as well.
That's a tongue twister if there ever was one.
Yeah, Real Ruel.
Awesome.
Yep.
Thank you, Ruel.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Black Film Space podcast. If you're interested in attending our events, becoming a member, or donating to our mission, please visit us at blackfilmspace.com. Also, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Black Film Space. Subscribe to our email list and podcast. All right, peace out, and see you soon.